Good evening and welcome to the Apologetics.com radio show where we challenge believers to think and thinkers to believe. I'm Harry Edwards, your host for the evening. And tonight, well, before I introduce tonight's topic, I want to say hi to our panelists this evening. I've got Lenny Esposito. How are you doing, Lenny?
Good, Harry. How are you? Happy New Year, or almost New Year, as we're coming along.
Yes, we are live, so this is not recorded.
No.
And the New Year is less than 48 hours away from now.
We're almost a quarter of the way through the 21st century.
Wow, that's right. That's crazy. And someone who is not new. You've even hosted the show before. I know, Tony.
Not old.
Yeah.
But not new.
There you go. Somewhere in the middle. Tony Costello, how are you doing?
Good. You called us panelists. That makes me feel like I should be an expert or something.
Oh, you
being
are.
Called a panelist.
In my book, you're an expert.
Either that or somebody's
You just
judging game
upgraded
shows.
me.
I'm not sure.
I just leveled up.
Well, again, welcome, gentlemen, to the show. I know Jacob is not with us, and so we will miss him. But we've got a show to do, and thanks, Tony, for chipping in.
It's late, but I'm here.
Yeah, you're here. All right.
I never know if it's late or it's early.
Well, before we get to the topic, just how's everything going at, let's start with you, Lenny, at Come Reason. How's everything?
Doing well. Busy. I'll be in New Orleans next week at the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary at their Defend the Faith conference. So that's going to be fun. And then our Dare to Defend conference happens in Corona, March 1st and 2nd. So that should be great. Neil Shenvy's coming out.
Nice.
Fuzz Rana, Ken Samples. Greg Gansel's going to talk about beauty.
Good old Double G.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
We're basically talking about how we're losing our humanity as a culture. So
You're going to speak at that one, too, right?
Yeah, I'll be there as well. And so tickets are on sale now. You
That's
can
great.
go to comereason.org and find those.
Do we get a discount, me and Tony?
Absolutely. Early bird pricing, actually.
But free.
All right.
Yeah.
And Tony, how are things at the Kirkwood Center?
Yeah, so...
and tell our listeners what that's all
Yeah.
about, because we're all part of that, actually.
That's right.
You certainly are, and Lenny's actually done most of the work.
Yeah, I would say that.
So the Kirkwood Center for Theology and Ethics, we launched it in June of last year, and we are trying to connect the seminary, the academy, and the church, and continue to provide the church with more and more resources to help it articulate and defend the Christian faith, especially in a time of cultural turmoil. Although maybe it's always a time of cultural turmoil. So our goal is just connect where the theological, philosophical, apologetic scholarship is, with the local church, so the pastors can have the best resources available.
We live in Southern California, and there are earthquake codes. And many of the older buildings, churches included, were built before these codes took place. So a lot of times what they have to do is they have to go back in and they have to add like straps between the building and the foundation. That's kind of what we're doing. We're the strap to hook between the rock, the solid rock, and then the church building
to put
itself.
that in the mission statement.
There you go.
I like that. That's great.
So we have the Kirkwood Center podcast for theology and ethics that we try and put out weekly, and got a big one coming up in January, actually, with a lot of some of the Discovery Institute guys, about a recent debate that took place at Harvard between Lee Cronin and James Tour. So
let them know the site. Like, where can they access all these great resources?
TheKirkwoodCenter.org is the website, and then you can find our podcast, the Kirkwood Center Podcast for Theology and Ethics, on our YouTube channel, Kirkwood Center.
All right, great. Well, tonight we are discussing, here's the title of the show tonight, The Ramifications of Adopting a Relativistic Concept of Truth. So if you've been living or hiding under a rock lately, you might have missed what's been going on in the last couple of months, and I'm referring to the tragic attack by Hamas on Israel on October 7th, in which thousands were killed, including grandmothers, babies, and many were taken hostage. One would think that the world would be unanimous in condemning the attacks, but it didn't take long before many started saying that it was Hamas and the Palestinians who were the victims and not the terrorists in this case. So here's I'm trying to connect it here. So hang on. Then antisemitism became the major topic in the days that followed. Sadly, many of the leaders of our elite institutions of higher learning chose to remain silent, choosing not to condemn the violence against Israel, instead rationalizing anti-Semitic behavior as contextual. So here, some of the presidents of these elite institutions of higher learning were brought before Congress, and there's this conversation or this line of questioning by Elise Stefanik, who is a U.S. representative from New York and a committee member of the Education and Labor Department here. And she point blank asked Dr. Claudine Gay, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no? And her response was, it can be depending on the context. So those are the famous words from her. That's her response. It can be depending on the context. So Stefanik was quick to ask a follow-up question, like, what's the context? And of course, at that point, all she can do is obfuscate, but she said something like targeted at an individual, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's obvious, of course. So Stefanik was quick to say, it's targeted at Jewish students, targeted at Jewish student individuals. So and after that, I think it was just awkward silence from Dr. Gay. When I was actually watching that, I mean, I wasn't really intending to watch it. I wasn't looking for it, but just happened to be on my feed. And then I heard that response, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I thought relativism was kind of dead in higher education, and I thought it was the Christians or the churches that are still sort of adopting that, but apparently it's alive and well. So I'm going to ask you guys, what are some of the ramifications of adopting a relativistic concept of truth here? So she couldn't say yes or no to that. It's kind of like spongy, you know. Can't really pin it. It's neither right, neither wrong. It's a weird kind of response. It depends on the context.
Well, what it means, you know, the idea of relativism is it's relative to what? I mean, there's no, again, what we're dealing with here when I think we're dealing in, well, probably most of the institutions of higher learning in our country these days, but it's certainly these major, you know, East Coast schools that have for so long rejected anything like a classical system of education, any kind of pursuit of truth that is grounded in a transcendent notion of reality, a transcendent, certainly like God would be the primary example of that. And so what has been in our institutions for a while is a notion of truth being something more like, when we make truth claims, these are attempts to gain power and control over the people to whom we're making the claim, right? So this is kind of the postmodern understanding of truth, that we're not really making claims about reality as we think it is, even if they might be fallible claims, you know, they could turn out later to be false or inaccurate. But, and you know, you'd say like maybe Nietzsche is sort of a fountainhead for this. He articulated this idea that all sort of claims about reality are really just underlying attempts to gain power and control over others, right? And I think we have to look soberly at the fact that most of our institutions of higher learning have been operating with this sort of concept of truth for quite some time now.
Yeah, I think the postmodern ideology first takes hold, and one of the benefits to those in academia of the postmodern ideology is it sets a standard, first of all, of superiority. where the expert is the one to show us simpletons that what you think is true isn't necessarily true. It reminds me very much of like if you ever watch one of these shows on National Geographic Channel or something like that, where you have the sociologist who goes and lives with the Aboriginal people of South America or whomever, and he'll say how you may think that these people live in barren conditions and your Western way of life is so much better, but look, they have a zero carbon footprint and they don't leave any litter behind. They consume everything, right? And so they say this with an erudite error, such as, I have unique insights that you peons don't. Right. What they leave out is if when they're living with that tribe, diagnosed with something like leukemia, they're not going to go to the witch doctor to have him kill a chicken. They're going to get themselves to the closest Western hospital to get proper treatment. Right. With the snake bite, with the gangrene infection. They're going to make sure that they don't lose that leg. They're going to run to a Western center. So it's this idea, but the postmodern point of view now allows the academic to say you don't understand. You're a victim of your own story, and it's your internal biases that are clouding you. Whereas I can help you see through that.
There's got to be a word for what you just described right there. But yeah, you're right. But when the cameras are off, you see the doctor sociologist go into his Humvee to stay at a 3-star hotel 5 miles down the road, right?
Yeah. Because there's an assumption there that one culture in discovering or in pursuing a certain path towards truth has actually discovered things about the way reality is and been able then to build certain technologies or have certain advancements.
Right. And that's actually one of the sort of the grounding facts behind relativism, meaning you see how things change, or we didn't know this before and we were wrong, and so there might be other things we're wrong about. So
and you might have relativism about truth, but there are different types of truths. There are metaphysical truths, and then there are moral truths. And I think what we're really dealing with here is because there's been this claim that there are no sort of deeper truths or metaphysical truths. Therefore, morality becomes relative to who? And we, living in the DEI culture of diversity, equity, inclusion, we say, well, if you're going to say that all truths are, or all morality is just relative to the cultures that produce or create moral standards and norms, and there are no moral standards or norms that are universal to all cultures or across time, because there's no such thing as a fixed human nature, right? Then who's to say which culture has the right, the better, the correct morality or not? So when you get a bunch of students protesting in favor of a barbaric slaughter of innocent people, how do you make the judgment that what their protest is wrong or deficient or unrighteous?
Right.
Who's to say, right? So you get yourself into this trap. And then when we see presidents of universities like Dr. Gay say something like, even if when she was asked, do you believe in the right to Israel to exist? And she said, yes, I firmly believe that Israel has the right to exist. One wonders, though, does she actually believe that, or is that just something she's saying expediently, because she feels in the moment that's what you do in order to get by. So it's hard to know. I'm not going to say she doesn't believe that Israel shouldn't exist, but it's hard to know if you're working under this framework of relativism.
Well, we know that she holds to absolutes and certain values because of her actions as president. So for example, she's right now, she had undergone a radical renaming campaign across Harvard to purge the Harvard buildings and places of names of those who were deemed morally deficient in previous eras, such as Winthrop House. Now, anybody who knows anything about Harvard, John Winthrop was the person who's responsible for the founding of Massachusetts, right? And his grandson, I believe, started Harvard, was one of its presidents. And so the Winthrop name is really deeply embedded in the history of Harvard, but she is, again, pulling that out because why? He was...
Let me guess. White male.
White male, exactly.
Yes.
In 2020, Harvard revoked Kyle Kashuv's acceptance to the institution because as a 16-year-old, he made comments on social media that were, 16-year-old boys.
Right.
And he had apologized for him. She disinvited feminist philosopher Devin Buckley from an English department colloquium on campus over her views on gender and trans issues. We've seen this over and over again. This is why the FIRE organization, which is the Foundation for Individual Rights, it used to be in education. I think it's an environment. This last year, they've rated Harvard, first time any college institution got a 0 score in terms of freedom of speech. It's staggering. And President Gay is leading this charge.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And the other two presidents
there's
were
always,
much better.
No. This goes back
from
quite a
MIT
ways.
and Yale.
But my point is, to say that there are no absolutes is disingenuous because she absolutely believes that white supremacy is wrong.
Wrong, right.
So she's making a moral claim based on absolutes.
I like what this headlines on a news media outlet said. Our institutions of higher learning are waging a war on truth. I think they're spot on that.
Yeah, well, and that, this goes back to, like what was Marx's maxim where he said, up until now, and Marx is in the mid-19th century, philosophers have only sought to describe the world, but the philosopher's true job is to change the world. And I think, I don't know if what was one of the Jonathan Haidt or one of these guys have talked about the difference between a justice-based university and a truth-based or truth-seeking universities. And a lot of these universities have become just sort of schools to develop political activists. Right. I mean, I'm reading. I went back to some of my articles on critical legal studies from the 90s, and I found an article by Duncan Kennedy, who was a professor of law at Harvard at the time. And he's arguing for he's arguing for the rejection of merit-based acceptance into the law school. He's arguing that they should just get rid of what he calls fundamentalist, colorblind meritocracy. He wants to get rid of this in favor of just absolute affirmative actions and just diversity. Diversity trumps meritocracy. And one of the things that he argues is that knowledge is is inherently and intrinsically political. So the idea is if you want to improve, if you want to get people power, wealth, prestige, then just get them into these institutions that produce knowledge, because that's a means for them to get power, wealth, and prestige. It's not knowledge in the classical sense of like trying to figure out how the world actually is and then how we should live, together in the world based on a certain design in the world. It's about us producing knowledge and then getting stuff that we want because people believe us, believe that we're saying true. And that's how these universities are operating. I mean, that's what they're doing. They're producing knowledge, not discovering truth.
Knowledge is just another kind of a commodity.
It's a commodity.
Right. Yeah.
It's something to be bargained and bought and sold. So maybe people need to think about that if they're trying to send their kids to Harvard.
Now, you did a lot of work on Marxism and socialism and the champions of those. Doesn't this sound like it's those guys that we're promoting. It's Marxism. And
well, I mean, I think it's sort of like it's a version of Marxism that we've just been living under for a long time, because critical theory made its way. Look, you might go to the STEM departments, and maybe the STEM departments are still working under some kind of more enlightenment mode, in the realm of the scientific project that, Bacon launched in the 16th century, but even there's this the relativism that has creeped in through the humanities departments is affecting even the STEM departments now. And this Marxism that that had its long march through the institutions, it made its way mainly through the social sciences, the humanities, literary studies, and so on. Anything that ends in studies, you can basically corrupt.
That's a red flag.
It's a red flag right off the bat. Yeah.
You're right.
Any academic degree you get in studies, you're.
Well, for example, Dr. Richard Bosshart recently wrote in the National Review that, quote, America's surgeons are not woke enough, according to the American College of Surgeons. And what he's saying is he's deeply concerned because the quality of surgical residents that we are now seeing, based on the DEI practices and the anti-racist teachings that are being developed by the American College of Surgeons, has caused the student of surgery to have a much lower skill set than those who would have just been hired based on merit. So maybe it would be, and it's the same issue that Congress called the colleges to. You want the best individuals there, and that may be overwhelmingly Asian or maybe white, but they can't have that. So you're getting underqualified surgical residents, and what does that mean for you as a patient? Now what? Now we're going to get poorer results.
Yeah, what are the ramifications of that?
And that's scary. And we're talking about
we're all going to be moving to.
We're talking about a STEM program here.
Yeah.
This is so. Yes, it does affect all of these.
Well,
things.
and look at the qualifications for Dr. Gay herself. I mean, we got to point out that this is very unusual, that somebody who's got, I think, 11 publications, and that's not books, that's just articles.
Half of which are plaplagiarized.
And she's under severe accusations of plagiary by other black professors like Carol Swain, who's a very well-known academic. So it does look, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I mean, it looks like what we would call a DEI hire, right? And that's not to say that she's not smart, that she's not intelligent, that she's not a high achiever.
But she's ideological.
But she's ideologically driven. That's what they're looking for. And, of course, she has the social features that match the narrative.
Right.
And that's going to always lead to a problem, especially if you do it generation after generation. We're going to start diminishing the quality of the type of institutions that we have.
Yeah, people will now doubt that just because you have a degree from Harvard, you know anything.
I mean, I've published 11 journal articles.
Yeah.
Maybe I should apply for
there you go.
presidency somewhere.
Well, we're coming up on a station break pretty soon, but if you want to join our conversation this evening, give us a call, 888-995-5552. Again, 888-995-KKLA. And again, before we get into the station break, I just want to remind our listeners that we are completely supported entirely by your generous donations. If you find our shows valuable and wish to see it continue, please support us by liking and sharing this on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media outlets. You can also help us with our radio costs by going to our website, www.apologetics.com, and click on the donate button. Any amount helps, and your partnership will help us remain on the air. So we'll see you right after the break. Well, welcome back to the second half hour of the apologetics.com radio show, where we challenge believers to think and thinkers to believe. Tonight's topic is the ramifications of adopting a relativistic concept of truth. And we connected that to the recent testimony of Dr. Claudine Gay. when she responded to the question, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no? Her response was, it can be, depending on the context. So right there, a direct reference to this philosophical concept of relativism, meaning that there is no absolute truth. Truth really is what you make it out to be. It's a feeling, it's a personal choice, not grounded in anything.
Here's an interesting thing. Harvard's motto currently on its site is Veritas, which means truth. But of course, you have to ask yourself, what truth? That's not Harvard's original motto. Harvard's original motto was Veritas Christo et Ecclesia, which is the truth found in Christ and the church. Mm-hmm. And the Harvard logo, the seal, had 3 books on it, Veritas, showing that study of knowledge can lead to truth. But the bottom book was actually flipped upside down, saying that there's a limit to man's knowledge. This comes from the Harvard graduate Christian community. And it was understood that as a limit to man's knowledge, we had to seek God in order to find that truth. Now, the modern logo, the Christo et Ecclesia, is gone.
It's just Veritas.
It's just Veritas, and the book is turned right side up, the 3rd book. So now it's like, it's very Kantian. It's very, we can know all truth, right? We can just leave it to us and we'll figure it all out ourselves. And that's where the problems start.
Well, I
didn't know that.
I wouldn't
Thanks for
say
sharing
that. I wouldn't say that about Kant, but I would say that if you flip the book upside down because you think that you are the source of truth, that you produce truth from the sheer act of your will.
Yeah.
Then you can flip the book upside down because you're not seeking to discover something outside of yourselves. You could infinitely produce all kinds of nonsense and call it truth. And in that sense, it could be potentially unlimited. And the problem with this, and this is the problem with postmodernism that, again, starts in around the 19th century with people like Nietzsche and Marx and so on and so forth, is that truth becomes a product of the will, right? Which is, in philosophical or theological terms, is called voluntarism. The will, the volition, just creates truth. And if that's your view of truth, then yeah, you could keep putting things out there and creating your own reality. Of course, what we know from experience is that the real world will always continue to bump up against the so-called truths that we think we can create.
You step off the curb, and it's not both you and the bus.
Right. And, one of the things that, and this is, the old debate that the Greeks had between, is there an actual, we know that there's an actual physical reality that we can study through the natural sciences. And if there's a design in the physical world, then is there a structure and design to the moral world, to the moral realm? And the answer to that is Christians is yes.
Yes,
there
of
is.
course. Yeah.
For the secularist, the challenge in their idea of truth is the grounding problem.
Yes, absolutely.
How do they ground truth? So if there is no super being, a transcendent being, some being outside of us or some force, whatever it is, then truth is grounded on us. It has to be, right? It can't just be floating out there.
You're talking about moral truth.
Right. Let's talk about moral truth. Right. And so I think you have those two choices. I don't know how you live in the in between.
Well, right. And to bring it back down to this particular situation, if truth is just produced as a product of the will, it's not grounded in anything other than the individual will or the corporate will, the will of a particular group or culture,
of people, which breaks down by
how. I mean, and if I don't think Claudine Gay is an anti-Semite, but how's she supposed to evaluate what these pro-Hamas protesters on her campus are saying?
Right.
That they're producing truth according to their cultural history and
But
background.
again, she
Yeah.
acts within certain circumstances that there is a truth to which you've violated.
Right.
Therefore, we're going to excuse you from faculty.
Right, and that could be
And
based
that is
in
her
what
downfall.
your strongest emotions
Right,
are.
right.
Then you could get into sort of emotivism.
So
well,
then
my
is it will to
strongest
power?
emotions
Yeah.
are something like this.
So in reality, if truth, in some ways, if truth is relative and you're trying to be consistent, you actually have to remain quiet. You can't really assert anything because you're either going to be for or against something. But you can't be for something because you might be wrong, but you can't really be against something because you might be wrong there too. You see how crazy that is?
You can get into just a perennial sort of like neutrality where you become just totally impotent to do any good.
It's not livable. It's not
Well,
livable.
and
Yeah.
it drove Nietzsche crazy, really. I mean,
Nietzsche did go
it ultimately leads to nihilism. It ultimately leads to the idea that, well, the world just is the way it is. No matter what I believe, it's still going to be nasty and ugly and ultimately savage. And what's the point of it all? What's the point of it?
I was sharing a while ago while we were at our break with you guys how I know the October 7th attacks were egregious, horrible, and evil, pure evil. It's their 9/11, right?
Yeah.
Where thousands perished and hundreds were taken hostage.
And tortured.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. And I'm glad I didn't see any videos of that. But apparently there were videos of that. Horrendous. But there is a silver lining in all of this. Like I was trying to analyze this in my own experience, in my own thinking. As bad as it is, it has now forced the world to look evil in a fresh way, so to speak. Like 9/11, maybe a lot were confused, and America changed forever after 9/11. And we've been confused, and things have been getting worse, but we haven't been willing to look evil in the eye and say that's evil. But now we're forced to do that. And so I think the kind of like the taking sides, people are definitely polarized, and you see the craziness on the other side. And I'm okay using that word, right? I mean, we know evil is evil. I think we side on that for sure. But now on the other pole, they don't see it as evil, and you know that's evil.
Well, you would think people would recognize that the wanton destruction of human life, especially the most innocent, defenseless of human life, babies, children, women,
grandmothers,
would you be able to immediately recognize that as an extreme or radical evil? Unfortunately, I think the problem is so deep right now in our culture that. There's a couple things. One, I think Pope John Paul II, when he was still alive and I was still Pope, called our culture, the Western culture of death, and he was talking in the context of life issues, abortion, euthanasia, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. But, we're becoming more and more comfortable with just, killing children, with, maybe pushing for the assisted killing of people we deem no longer useful to the society, and so on and so forth. So one wonders there how close we are to our own barbarity.
Yeah.
Right?
We just cloak it in medical garb.
We cloak it in medical garb. We do lethal injections and everything. And we don't see the baby when it's scalded to death or its skull is crushed in the womb. But the other thing too, going back to Marx, is we're very simplistic in our analysis of what we think. There is something that now people as far as a grounding for right and wrong, and it's very simplistic and it's very shallow, and it is whoever seems to have the greater amount of economic, political, or military might is automatically considered guilty and culpable. And whoever has the lesser amount of the same things is automatically considered innocent or morally good, right? That's the oppressor, oppressed, or what one sociologist from MIT, Paul Hollander, called the cult of the victim.
Yeah.
The victim, you're enthralled with those who have less material power, and they are somehow just immediately perceived as almost like morally pristine. right? So if Israel is the stronger state, the more successful state, the more
Right.
successful and prosperous nation, they must be the guilty ones.
Right. What's fascinating about that ideology is that is actually only comes out of a Christian society. In other words,
Yes,
it's
that's
a
right.
uniquely Christian heresy. It's because prior to Christianity, it was always understood that those who were the victors, those who were the mightier, were considered better, right? It was Rome and the barbarians. It's not the infidels who you cheer. So it's literally when Christianity highlighted the everyman. I mean, the Romans couldn't figure this out. They would say, you're the religion of women and slaves, and that was like one of the worst derogatory things that you could say about people. You're the religion of the underdogs. But Christianity held, no, all human beings have intrinsic worth, even the underdogs. You can't treat them as subservient or subhuman.
Substandard.
Substandard.
Yeah, substandard, subhuman. So what's happened, though, is people have taken this idea and used it now as a cudgel against Christians to say all people who are underdogs are therefore not only equal, but heck, all you need to do is get out of the way to let them flourish. And you are obviously in the way because you have more cards in your deck than they do.
Right.
Yeah, it's a very I mean, Thomas Sowell has written so many books, and he talks about this quite a lot about
He's the guy to read nowadays.
This oversimplistic analysis of why there are disparities in culture. One, how the disparities even arise. But then two, and this is why I try and say it this way. The problem with Marxism, and this actually goes back to Rousseau, is they place the moral component not in the heart of the individual person, but in the relationship between two persons. So we would say like a boss and his employee. For Marx, that's immediately because there's a discrepancy in the relationship. The boss is guilty and the employee is always, the proletariat the employee is the better person, right? Mm-hmm. But as Christians, we would say, no, it's the quality of the person occupying those positions that matters. It's the moral character of the boss versus the moral character of the employee, or the moral character of the parent and the child, the moral character of the president and the people he's serving. It's not just in the relationship between the two. And this is because of Marx's extreme anti-hierarchical idea that everything has to be exactly the same if you're going to have a good society. You can't have any kind of discrepancies in society. And this is just it's an impossible way of living. First of all, it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And second, it's just totally off the mark with regards to where morality actually lies, which is in the heart and soul of every individual man, woman, and child.
Now, if I'm going to play devil's advocate, they might say, well, doesn't the Bible say that there is no difference between Jew and Greek, slaves or free or whatever? I mean, what?
But it also says, if you lust after a woman, you have sinned.
Yeah.
So regardless of whether you've acted upon it, regardless of if ever she even noticed you, she may be walking away from you, but it's your internal reflection that makes the difference.
Well, and on the no Jew and Greek, I mean, what God is clearly reminding us is that we all have a human nature, and that nature is being made in the image and likeness of God, right? So those differences are superficial.
Yeah.
Those are superficial differences. Black, white, male and female are not quite as superficial. but ethnic
they're not
differences,
they don't make an intrinsic worth difference.
They are superficial compared to the human nature that is in the image and likeness of God. Even male and female are superficial differences compared to that commonality. Right.
I'm wondering, do we have a caller? We okay. All right. Well, we're waiting for this caller, but there's this one commentator. I like what he said here, and I'm quoting: "The controversy surrounding gay are a symptom of how progressivism has poisoned higher education." So, to your point, a lot of what's going on is not based on merit anymore. It's really just based on representation.
Well, yeah, and even Carol Swain, who has a claim against Gay for plagiarizing her work, says that, quote, I quote, this is Carol Swain, Harvard can't condemn Miss Gay because she is the product of an elite system that holds minorities of high pedigree to a lower standard, end quote.
Okay.
So she's saying that, hey, Claudine Gay is a high-level person, but she's been pushed into something that she was not prepared for.
All right, let me bring this caller in. This caller's calling from L.A., and he sees a different side of this topic. Caller, is your name Son?
Sean.
Sean, welcome to the show. Do you have a question or a comment?
I have a comment and a question.
Okay.
As I said, that, I don't agree with a lot of things because I am a woman of God according to the scriptures and a woman of prayer. I don't understand how a lot of, here lately, there's been a lot of emphasis on, at first it was Ukraine, now Israel. And I'm not on anyone's side. I'm on God's side. I try to analyze things according to the scriptures. And I wanted to know why, if we're so concerned, like I'm a part of you. You're a part of me because we're one of the same of the Lord. So no matter what, I try to judge things according to the scriptures and how the Lord is close. How the Lord would, let's search the scriptures out and see how things were done according to the scriptures. And I see that everybody is kind of like one-sided. I'm not one-sided. I'm on God's side, and it's a very tedious kind of thing because there's so much wrong that has been done and offenses on all these sides.
Okay. Sean, let me interrupt you for a second. Are you saying then, if you can put this in a question, are you saying because we can't discern right or wrong because it's so confusing, so we need to remain agnostic about truth? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying no, not agnostic. We need to remain scriptural, because I continue to say all have done some kind of wrong on that. Okay, the Hamas, yes, they are wrong. I'm not on their side. Mm-hmm. But there was some offenses to Hamas that there was a seed that was planted that brought out this, that helped feed this ugly, barbaric behavior. And Israel, we try to stay with Israel because of the scriptures, but then Israel has wronged, and most people in Israel don't even believe in the God that we serve.
No, that's right. That's right.
They have done wrong too.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. I agree with you that we have to keep an open mind and a realistic understanding that the idea that this can be couched in a black hats versus white hats scenario is by itself simplistic. There, even Russia and Ukraine, Russia was clearly the invader, but if you understand Ukraine, that's the highest Nazi population, white supremacist movement, all that in there, of any of those. However, we do have certain understandings that, if you're a child and you go to school and someone harasses you every day, that can be discouraging. But if you come out and take a gun and blow that person's head off, you have overreacted and you are accountable for your actions, because the result of your response, it far outweighs the provocation. And I think so. What we have to understand is it's not just because they were provoked that they can do whatever they want in their counter response. We're saying that somebody called you a name, and this is, again, I'm using a very dumbed down example, and you came back with a pistol and shot them dead. There is a proper level of response. What Hamas did, and Hamas isn't even all Palestinians. You got to remember, Hamas is a recognized organization that uses terror as its
not on their side.
Right.
Oh yeah, we're not. No, we know that.
No.
Yeah.
But even Jesus, when he was confronted with the woman at the well who was talking, and she was a Samaritan woman, right? She said, "Hey, our prophets say we should worship on this mountain, and you Jews say you should worship on that mountain, and you Jews have treated us terribly. You're in control," right? It's the same kind of dynamic, but Jesus didn't let that slide. He said, look, you worship what you don't know, but there is an actual way that God has said to worship. So he does draw a distinction, yet he doesn't alienate her in the conversation. He tries to draw her in.
Hey, Sean, thanks for calling, and we appreciate the dialogue. So we've got some other conversations we need to attend to. So keep listening, and again, we really appreciate your thoughts and your opinions. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, and I would just say too that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And one thing that Sean does right, we need to be praying for Israel. We need to be praying for all the Muslims, and we need to be praying for Hamas. I mean, look, I was in Afghanistan. I fought against the Taliban. Taliban and Hamas are basically the same thing. Hamas used to go into eastern Afghanistan and come in and get training in the mountains.
There are Palestinians.
And you know what? We would, before we go outside the wire, we would pray every day that that Jesus would appear to those people that we were going to fight against, that they would come to know the one true God, that they would come to know their Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, put down their weapons, and and all that, and we did. But that we will also know that we were wise enough to also know to pray that if we had to get in a firefight, that our bullets would hit first. And that's just being, wise as a serpent, gentle as a dove, because the world is just this broken. And you got to think, Israel's not, she was right, Israel's not like a faithful Christian state or anything. I mean, they have same-sex marriage, they practice abortion in Israel. But, at the sort of like, living in the world perspective, if you were to blow up Gaza with Hamas at its leadership into a world power, and if you were to blow up Israel into a world, and I mean just expand Israel into world power, and there were two world powers, Israel and Gaza, which one would you rather live in?
Well, for example, there are many Christians in Palestine. There are Palestinian Christians who are suffering because of this. And the IDF does not make a distinction. They don't ask you whether you're Christian or Muslim first. They just shoot. However, again, when they took over, when the Palestinian forces, Hezbollah, took over Bethlehem, there were some 5,000, 6,000 Christians living in Bethlehem. It was predominantly 50 to 60% of Bethlehem were Christians because it's Bethlehem. There are fewer than 200 today because Muslims will choke that out. And that is true throughout the Muslim world.
Is Bethlehem occupied by Palestinians now?
Yes, Bethlehem's a Palestinian territory.
Didn't know
that. And Hezbollah is the primary.
But I do appreciate callers like Sean.
It gives you a good balance.
This is not an easy topic at all, and we never claim that it is. In fact, like I said, I was really heartbroken when I heard such testimony from Congress. Because in reality, this is a matter of life and death, ultimately. And,
and again, it's one thing to say, we have been oppressed, so we're going to go in and try and throw off our oppression. It's another thing to put a GoPro on your military helmet and film yourself raping young music goers.
We can't discount the demonic activity that exists. I've felt it palpably, in certain parts of Afghanistan as well. And I mean, the stuff. These are demonically inspired acts. I mean, they're acts of absolute irrationality and barbaric cruelty. They have to be stopped. The only thing that stops these things, I'll tell you what, the only two forces that stop something like that are Jesus Christ or a bullet. I mean, it comes down to that. You meet true evil like this, either the person is going to have a conversion where they come to know the living God, they come to know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, and that life changes, or they need to be stopped. It's just, I'm sorry.
That's why Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I believe that truth, capital T, is ultimately embodied.
That's right.
It's not
abstract.
That's a good point.
Truth is not somewhere there floating. It's hard to grasp that. But,
and I think that's part of the problem. And this is what, to come back to these Palestinian protesters on Harvard and other campuses, is they have they just take an abstract view of these concepts, and they're championing the concept. They're not championing the reality that underlies it. It was fascinating. In Maryland, they had a Palestinian protest, and they had this filmed, and a LGBTQ guy comes in with his flag, and they came in and they ripped that flag out of his hand fast. They did not want to be associated with him in any way, shape, or form. They almost took him out. The police had to take him away because he thought, oh, these are my buddies, and no, they weren't.
And I just want to, and because I know we're wrapping up, we need to fight against anti-Semitism in this country, and we also need to make sure that Muslims are not aggressed against and treated unfairly. Sure. I mean, I fought side by side with some unbelievable Muslim men in Afghanistan, and I loved them to death. Mm-hmm. And so there is this. But look, I don't know. We all need Jesus. I don't know what to say. Like, we need conversion in this country and everywhere.
That's the way to end it, Tony. Yeah. Well, you've been listening to Apologetics.com radio, where we challenge believers to think and thinkers to believe. Our hope is that you've learned some aspect about the Christian worldview that strengthens your faith and make you want to learn more. So special thanks to my panelists this evening, Tony and Lenny, and to our behind-the-scenes sound engineer, and special thank you to you, our listeners. Until next time, and I guess the next time we hear from you or see you is next year. So have a happy New Year, everyone. Good night.
Happy New Year's.